This is not just about a fast car. This is about a hidden system, designed by the most dangerous engineer in Formula One history. And if it's legal, it will destroy the competition. Adrian Newey spent over a year building something no one expected. Not Red Bull, not Ferrari, not even the FIA. He put it on the AMR26. And somehow, during 5 full days of testing, nobody realized what it was really doing. Not a single journalist, not a single on board, not even a photo leak. But it was there, working, every lap, generating downforce from a part of the car that shouldn't even count as aerodynamic. If it's banned in Bahrain, Aston Martin's season is over. If it's approved, they could go from midfield to podiums. And here's the part nobody is talking about. This wasn't just clever. It may have violated the rules without breaking them. How? That's what we're going to uncover. Because once you understand what Newey did, you'll realize why this car should never have been allowed on track in the first place. But here's the twist. He might get away with it. So before we go deeper, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant to be public. It started with silence. Barcelona. January. No cameras. No fans. No press. Just concrete, wind, and secrets. For 5 days, the Circuit de Catalunya was sealed off from the world. Every garage was locked. Every screen was covered. Every team was on edge. And there, surrounded by shadows and unfinished bodywork, stood Adrian Newey. He wasn't supposed to be here. His contract with Red Bull had ended months ago, but the ink on his Aston Martin deal had barely dried. And yet, here he was, pacing, watching, sketching, but not talking. And here's what made this preseason different from every other year. No one could watch what was happening. No media were allowed inside. No live streams. No slow-motion replays. Just occasional leaks, rumors, and shaky photos taken through holes in the fences. Which means that for the first time in decades, a team could try anything. No immediate scrutiny. No instant Twitter outrage. No rival engineers zooming in at home. Just raw, unfiltered testing. And that's exactly when Aston Martin rolled out the AMR26. It looked unfinished, wrapped in camouflage, black carbon. No sponsors. It barely ran on day 1. Only 5 slow laps before stopping dead on track. People wrote it off. Another failed debut. Another preseason disaster. But that's what Newey wanted them to think. Because while the world focused on lap times, tire wear, and engine sounds, the trick had already been installed. And it wasn't in the engine. It wasn't even in the aerodynamics everyone was watching. It was in the one place no one expected. And if you think that's dramatic, wait until you hear what happened next. Friday morning. Final day of testing. Every other team had already run hundreds of laps. Ferrari looked sharp. McLaren was bouncing back. Mercedes? Flawless mileage. Even Red Bull, after their crash, got back on track. But Aston Martin? They had nothing. One driver. One session. One chance to prove the AMR26 could even finish a run. That driver? Was Fernando Alonso, a veteran of 23 seasons. A 2-time world champion. And until now, a man who had never driven a car designed by Adrian Newey. He knew the stakes. This wasn't just a test. It was a reveal. Not to the fans. Not to the media. To the paddock. Because make no mistake, even when testing is private, every team has spies. Engineers watching top speeds. Photographers capturing brake ducts. Analysts measuring ride heights frame by frame. And yet, when the AMR26 hit the track, none of them noticed what was really happening. Yes, the lap times were slow. Alonso finished near the bottom. The top speed was artificially capped. The car looked unfinished, twitchy, fragile. But it wasn't about speed. It was never about speed. Because under the bodywork, buried inside the carbon fiber, beneath the suspension arms, between the rules and the gray areas, was something else. A shape, a structure, a function. And if you looked close enough, you'd see it wasn't just holding the car together. It was changing how the car behaved. Lap after lap, the data didn't match the visual. The downforce numbers were too high. The stability too clean. Especially under acceleration. But no one said a word. Because on paper, everything looked normal. And that's exactly what Newey wanted. Because by the time the other teams realized what was going on, it would be too late. They'd already signed off on the data. They'd already ignored the footage. And Aston Martin would be headed to Bahrain with a weapon no one could copy in time. But now comes the twist. The trick they used wasn't technically illegal. And yet, if the FIA interprets it differently, it could get banned overnight. Which raises the real question. What exactly did Newey build into that rear suspension? And how did he make it look invisible? We'll get there. But first, you need to understand why this trick could change everything about how Formula One cars generate downforce in 2026. It started with something small. A tiny bulge. Low. Hidden. Right at the back of the AMR26. Most fans didn't notice. Most engineers didn't care. But a few observers saw it. And they asked the same question. Why is the rear suspension shaped like that? Because it wasn't just a mechanical link. It wasn't just supporting the chassis. It looked sculpted, aerodynamic, and not in a subtle way. This was aggressive, deliberate, and most importantly, functional. Now here's what makes this so dangerous. In Formula One, you're not allowed to generate downforce from suspension components. At least, not directly. The rules say that aerodynamic devices must be declared and regulated. Suspension arms are meant to be structural. They can have shapes, but they're not supposed to act like wings. Unless you design them to the absolute edge of what the rulebook allows. And that's exactly what Newey did. He turned the rear suspension of the AMR26 into a beam wing. But not in name. Not in paperwork. Not in theory. In function. A second aerodynamic element, disguised as a structural component. And it worked. Even at low speed, the rear of the car was planted. Even with the engine running in conservative mode, the car was stable under throttle. The cameras didn't catch it. The sensors didn't flag it. And the other teams didn't realize it until Alonso's telemetry was leaked. Because something didn't add up. The car was producing levels of rear-end grip that didn't match its wing configuration. No DRS. No extra flaps. But the rear tires were glued to the asphalt. And now, engineers from rival teams are scrambling. Because if the FIA allows this trick to stand, it opens a loophole so big, you could build an entire aero philosophy around it. But if it's declared illegal, Aston Martin could lose everything. They'll have to redesign the car from scratch. And with less than 3 weeks before Bahrain, that would be game over. So why take such a massive risk? Because Adrian Newey has done this before. And the last time, it won world championships. We'll come back to that. Because to understand just how far Newey pushed the rules this time, we have to go back. Back to Red Bull. Back to the RB7. And back to the loophole that changed Formula One forever. This is not the first time Adrian Newey has bent the rulebook. It's just the first time he's done it for Aston Martin. Go back 15 years. Red Bull. 2010. 2011. 2012. The RB7. The RB8. Those cars weren't just dominant. They were confusing. Because back then, teams would line up on Friday, compare data, analyze replays, and still walk away with one question. Why is Red Bull so fast in corners where they shouldn't be? And every time the FIA looked into it, they found nothing illegal. Because Newey didn't break the rules. He bent them. Wrapped them around his pencil. Exhaust-blown diffusers. Flexi wings. Ride height manipulation. Invisible tricks that only worked because no one else was bold enough to try them. Until it was too late. By the time rivals figured it out, the titles were already his. And now, he's back. Same style. New team. Fresh rulebook. But the philosophy is identical. Find a gray area. Build around it. Disguise the effect. Then unleash it when no one's watching. And that's exactly what happened in Barcelona. Because while the paddock slept on Aston Martin, while the car barely ran, and the timing screens ignored Alonso, Newey's trick was running lap after lap, right in front of everyone, generating real downforce. From a component no one had even bothered to study. But here's the part that stings. Red Bull knows. Mercedes knows. McLaren knows. They've seen this movie before. They're just not sure how it ends. Because this time, Newey doesn't have a season to refine the trick. He needs it to work now. At full scale. At race pace. In front of the world. And with Bahrain just days away, the question is no longer whether the trick is real. The question is whether the FIA will stop it in time. Or, if they even can. Because what Newey did isn't just clever. It's something much more dangerous. It's legal. Until someone proves otherwise. It looks like suspension. It moves like suspension. But it acts like a wing. That's the core of the AMR26's trick. To the naked eye, it's just carbon rods, holding the rear end of the car together. But under load, at speed, those rods do something else. They channel air. They reshape flow. They bend the laws of what non-aero components are supposed to do. And here's the key. They never move. Because if a piece moves, the FIA measures it, tests it, flags it. But if it stays perfectly still, if it's part of the structure, You can design it however you want. Newey knew this. He knew the technical directive word for word. So he built the rear suspension with one purpose: to behave like a secondary diffuser, angled to accelerate air, curved to manipulate pressure, and positioned so precisely that even a 1-degree misalignment would kill the effect. It's not a guess. It's not a side benefit. It's deliberate. And it's terrifyingly effective. Because the AMR26 doesn't just carry speed through corners. It plants the rear under acceleration. And that's where the real-time gain happens. Every car loses grip when energy is deployed. The rear gets light. The tires spin. Traction disappears. But not this car. The AMR26 uses a structural piece to create just enough vertical load, right when the battery hits full release. And that means the driver can get on the throttle sooner. Every lap. Every corner. Every run. That's worth tenths. Over a race distance. It's worth seconds. And the best part? There's no button. No flap. No activation. Nothing that triggers a warning. Nothing that breaks a rule. Because the FIA only regulates aerodynamic devices. And the AMR26's wing? It's technically suspension. At least for now. But if you're wondering how this got past inspection, that's the next piece. Because as brilliant as the design is, it should have been caught. So the real question becomes, did the FIA miss it? Or did someone let it through? Every car goes through scrutineering. That's the law of Formula One. Dimensions, weight, wing movement, suspension geometry. It's all checked. Line by line. System by system. So how did this pass? How did a rear suspension that functions like an aerodynamic device slip through technical inspection unnoticed? Simple. The FIA wasn't looking for it. Not because they were lazy, but because this concept wasn't supposed to exist. The rulebook defines what suspension is. It describes it as load-bearing, mechanical, passive. It assumes that anything that moves the car is not allowed to move the air. But that's the trap. Because the AMR26 doesn't need to move. It just sits there, in the exact airflow, at the exact height, at the exact angle. And it does the job of a wing, without being a wing. Now here's where things get even darker. In 2025, the FIA introduced a technical directive, specifically to clamp down on hidden beam wings. It was designed to stop teams from shaping the lower rear crash structure into something that could generate downforce. That directive? It doesn't cover suspension arms. Newey knew that. So instead of hiding the trick in the crash structure, he buried it in plain sight, in the rear geometry, in the wishbones, in components that the FIA didn't expect to influence airflow. And remember, Aston Martin only ran one proper day of testing. Just 65 laps total. Not enough to trigger suspicion. Not enough data for a pattern to emerge. Just enough to confirm it works, and then pack it up. No data shared. No protest filed. No headlines. Which means the only people who truly understand what happened are inside that garage, and maybe one more. Fernando Alonso. Because here's what nobody has asked yet. If Alonso knew the trick was active, why didn't he say anything? And why, after 23 years in the sport, did he sound more excited than ever after testing a car that ran dead last?